I'm going to step away and the second session is going to convene. Please keep your messages coming out on social media. We've got a couple of us responding. Thank you.
So I just wanted to, just from the last point discussed, Mary especially brought this up. And for the record, I think it's a point that maybe we want to discuss later, and it's about the tools. And the tools that are available to farmers to assess their soil, for example. And there are so many of them. You talk about the carbon tools. So maybe we can discuss that at the end, of how people feel about these tools. So the next session is about reducing emissions from agriculture. And that is depending on the farm type and enterprises. We had in the list before wetlands and peatlands, and we didn't discuss that very much, but I think that probably will fit in this session as well. So if we keep that in mind. So is there somebody who wants to discuss how we can reduce emissions, maybe based on conventional practices perhaps, or what do we need to do in order to achieve this? Do we need to go organic? Do we need to be more ecological minded? And how about the new farmers? So anybody would like to start on this?
Yeah. I think, in terms of what it is to reduce, it is definitely an area, and it's one of our themes within our net zero ambition. And there are a myriad of ways in which you can reduce, and they go from, as we've been discussing, improving your soils, through to how you travel on your soils, how often you travel on your soils, how you put fertilizer down, how often you put fertilizer, what kind of fertilizer you use, whether you're using clovers and things like that within your grass system, all the way through to what kind of livestock you have, how you are feeding your livestock. And Mary wrote this stuff an awful lot better. So, if you go up, and as I have done, up to Ibers at Aberystwyth, you can go into some of their little sheds there. It does not stink of garlic, because they're using garlic as a potential way of reducing methane. Within sheep, you can fecund sheep, which is to prevent them from getting the milk from the mother, and actually that stops the bacteria going into the gut of a lamb, which enables the production of methane, apparently. So there are a chunk of ways in which you can make changes in how you do these things. And I suppose an awful lot of it is about getting that knowledge down to the farms, and for it to actually make sense in terms of as an action you can take. Just the point around what it is to do organic. Personally, I come from a completely non-pejorative kind of way of seeing things. Personally, it doesn't worry me what it is you're doing, as long as you are doing things within the law and it works. It's a small part of what the market is. Yeah. So whether or not that should or could be bigger, I couldn't say. The market drives an awful lot of that, and at the moment, my understanding is like 1.5%. So in order to make that grow, you might as well probably know better within these things, you've got to actually make it incentivised to be a different thing. But anyway, there are a lot of different ways in which you can make change.
I noticed in the NFU productivity report, there was a suggestion that a price on carbon might be a way in which farmers could be incentivised, and I wondered what was meant by that and how it would be implemented.
I'm not quite sure in terms of where that would be.
Whether it was, this is what you would estimate would merit support in some form of incentives or grants. So it would be a notional price of carbon in order to incentivise payments. You're nodding, so maybe that would be the way. But in other contexts, there's a suggestion of a carbon tax, possibly to replace VAT or something like that. So what that would do is to shift the market incentives for different types of agricultural. So it wasn't that you think that probably was intended.
I don't know.
Okay, so there are two possibilities of ways of doing that. I don't know. Other people want to comment on that? No.
Can I just ask a question, just following up on the natural method? So do you think we should put more effort into finding natural ways to reduce emissions? And do you think there is potential for that to be enough?
My kind of feeling within an awful lot of this is a lot of work is going on those bits, and I don't know whether natural or quite what it's about delivering your outcomes, but actually is, to be honest, the blocker often seems to be about how do you get that information down in the first place.
Okay.
So whether it's at North Wick doing things on the farmlets or IBERS or any of the Rothamsted stuff, how do you get that knowledge to go down? And actually a crucial part in all of that, actually got the good with the farms for AHTB, I'm going to forget their names now, but where you got the kind of
The
demonstration.
strategic dairy farms, and the monitor farms and the farm excellence programme.
Exactly. So having an understanding from those kind of places where people get learning, I think is important.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Adam.
I was only one quick thing. We have to be very careful in terms of looking at what other priorities society have for land use and our farming systems, and the tools that we're using to measure carbon emissions from the farms, and this whole sustainable intensification is a route to our solutions, because that can drive farming practices that may not be of benefit for a wildlife point of view. If you purely look at carbon, and particularly you focus on carbon emissions, and don't take into account, or are not sophisticated enough to take into account sequestration or other measures. So it's quite important to be very careful in terms of how we handle measuring of emissions and where that drives us.
Okay, I want to look at this as a whole mindset paradigm thing that we, as farmers over the last tens of years, we seem to have lost. We've lost the market. We've let go of the market. A lot of our cooperatives have disappeared, but I think we need to have farmers have got bigger and bigger because of the economics of farming and producing commodities, which basically a lot of farmers just pushing onto the market, onto a globalized commodity market. But I would just like to see a whole sweeping change. I mean, I'm unashamedly, I've got this from the Soil Association manifesto, about my own bits. But we need to commit to a 10-year transition to agroecology, climate and nature-friendly farming, such as an organic and agroforestry. But I'm not saying all of that. I'm just saying we need to have far more small-scale, especially organic vegetable and fruit production, to be sold locally. And we need the pasture-fed livestock. We need to distinguish between pasture-fed livestock and pasture-fed milk producers. Distinguish that and market it as a real beneficial thing, as opposed to meat that's come from Brazil or something.
I think there is a pasture-fed livestock
label,
isn't
and they're
there?
trying. But they haven't got it together to market.
We don't have the market differentiation that they have in the States. We don't have the feedlot model versus the pasture model to make that clear.
Well,
but it's not
we do a lot more pasture food.
Yeah,
It's not such a strong
No.
differentiator.
So, and the other thing, we need to invest in making a diverse, fresh, affordable food available for all by investing in regional and local supply chain infrastructure for processing, marketing and distribution that allows this nature-friendly mixed farming, especially horticulture. So we need a network of local food hubs for aggregation and distribution, possibly cooperatively owned, but for the benefit of all. We need far more covered markets in each large town or city. And I say covered markets, we run the extra farmers market, and we have, to be honest, we just have queues of people there, and we just have this limited period from 8 o'clock on a Thursday till 2 o'clock to sell our produce. And then we get queues of people, and it's outdoors, and it's unreasonable on our staff and it's unreasonable on our customers to stand there on a Thursday when it's pouring with rain. It's just so difficult, and it's just added costs, and it's hard for the customer to get there. They want to buy our produce. It's just hard work. But if we had these wonderful covered markets where it'd be part of the community and just far more than, if you go to it in most other countries in the world, they have this market system. In fact, a lot of our customers at the farmers market aren't English at all because they're just so used to coming to farmers market. But it would actually, if you had more of these outlets and this infrastructure in place, you'd encourage these, you'd make it more viable for these small producers producing agroecologically to be able to sell their produce. And the third element to this is that, and this came up in the RSA report, which is a fantastic report. I don't know if you've read the Farming Food and Future of Land, but one of the main drivers for change would be the public procurement, which is actually beginning to happen there. But we need to set out a plan to use government buying power to make healthy and sustainable diets the norm in schools, hospitals, and other public settings. And the Danish and the French are doing. For Denmark, 60% organic food procurement, and France is 50% local and organic food procurement. Government buying must get bolder on creating new markets for sustainable farm foods, including the grass-fed, pasture-fed meat. And I'm just really interested that we've got two, the Dutch, you're from the Dutchy and David's from the National Trust. But I've always had this thing that, a small scale organic horticulture is incredibly productive actually. And some people can make a living off relatively small amounts of land. But I just wondered if there's a way that if we could create a model where we've got the landowner and you have the young, enterprising, dynamic young farmers, growers coming in, and investors, because there's a certain amount of capital investment involved. If we could combine those three elements to produce, and have a model where, say, you had 50 acres on the estate, we put to growing horticulture in a fantastic rotation, supplying direct, maybe the farm shops on the estates or local markets, or there's lots of different ways of selling produce. If we could create a model so it's a win-win-win for the landowner, the growers, and the investors. And there's so much money in the city there. They just want to invest in social and environmental beneficial things. But there must be a way to create a model which is replicable. It's good for investors. They could get their 5 or 6% return. The landlord could get a good income, and the growers could make a really good living out of it, especially if they're really good. It depends how good they are, but they could make it really good. And I've actually been working on such a model, but I'm sure it would work. But we just need to get the land available. The biggest restriction to grow, I'm a member of the Landworks Alliance, and there's tens of people, hundreds of people would love to have a bit of land to grow on. And we've had woofers on our farm, and so many of them leave the country because they want to grow. They want to be growers, and there's just no opportunities in the country. And the biggest restriction is the price of land or access to land, and yet you've got these huge agribusinesses taking on all this land, producing what they produce. But it just seems to be, just seeing it from their point of view, it's just so unjust. People just can't access land to grow, and that's their passion. And, they're really dynamic young people. We'd love to have an opportunity, but we just haven't got the model. Yeah. And with the farm business tendencies the way they are, there's no opportunity. We just need to find the right model, work together to find a model which is replicable so that we can make this happen.
Thank you, Martin. Chris?
Well, just to respond, I think absolutely there's an opportunity there. I think you said it yourself, really. It depends on the quality of the grower. It has to have sound financial viability, and then you can make it a win-win-win situation.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think the trend we've observed, certainly for the last 30 years, let us say, where the solution, where a farm is big, for example, the economic solution is to make it larger, because that's how you can spread your fixed costs and make it more viable. We're now seeing a direct reversal of that in many cases. And most of the lettings we've had in the last couple of years really have been for relatively small units, less than our average size, where you're looking for people with the very skills that you described. So whether that's indicative of the way the market's going to go, I don't know, but it's certainly our experience.
Tenancies, they're what length period of tenancy?
Nearly always more than 20 years.
Oh, is that a Dutchy phenomenon?
We're trying to lead by example. I'm not sure how many followers we've got yet.
There is a fellow in Oxfordshire who's letting small amounts of land to dairy enterprise and other
Yeah.
David.
Well, so I did that at home, let a small farm to young new entrants into the industry, and but what was quite interesting was we found a couple, and they went on to bring a farm. Then we found another couple, but the choice, we had 50 applicants, but the number of people who actually had a business plan was 2 or 3. There was a lot of sort of dreamers, and actually it's getting the people who are good enough. But to take Martin's other point, I have thought for a long time that there is an alternative model of supermarket, which involves investors, involves maybe a county council making available the car parking space and the central shed, or maybe that's investors investing in the central shed, and the various things that you would get in a supermarket are provided as part of people's businesses, giving them a permanent 24-hour outlet, not just on the odd day when there's a farmer's market and Crediton every other Tuesday or whatever it might be. You actually got an outlet. Yes, you have to have a system that picked up the toothpaste as part of it, but you could, with I think, come up. But you would need help to get through, because ultimately the challenge, I think, is the fighting against a sort of reaction against increasing food price at all. So politically, food price is screwed right down, and it's going to continue to be. Some of the methods do have a higher cost base, either because they don't have the scale or whatever. And I think that there are schemes that could be tried, experimental, and Devon could play a part in that, certainly. But ultimately, I think the price of food is going to be an issue, particularly in the situation we're at the moment in the trade deals that might.
Can I just respond to that?
No, do
Okay, so we produce a lot of vegetables. And let's take cauliflower, for example. The wholesale price of our cauliflower is 90 pence. The retail price is £2 or £2.20 or £2.50. It's a huge margin there. And if we can go more direct,
Sure,
and make these distribution systems just
I completely
and
understand.
really simple, really efficient. And that's why we need a farmer's market which is really efficient. We can come in there with our trailer. We could at the farm. We could stack all up all the vegetables, back it in. That's it. At the moment we're having to drive our van in, unload it all, wheel it up the pavement. It's just so inefficient.
I think there's a definite proposal there, and I wonder whether there might be some mileage for an outside this room consultation.
Well, I think it would be something that, as an experiment, would be really interesting to see. I think Cornwall has tried something similar somewhere. I understand.
I think it's been quite demanding.
And it's been a challenge, but it may well be for other reasons. I think it was right next door to a Waitrose, wasn't it? And I think Waitrose suddenly realised that they'd given lease to somebody who might be competitive with them. I can't do that for you. But
There are complications.
there are some complications. But the principle.
I wonder whether Mary, reflecting on her experiences and enthusiasm for agroforestry early on, which is waned somewhat, that agroforestry probably, in a more diverse agricultural economy as a whole, is probably a really quite helpful thread for a lot of landowners. And, and often it's around the margins of the farm around the edges, where that can be making a difference. And that might be around water, that might be around pollinators, around a number of different elements, which is all great farming practice and true. but probably the incentives that are in place and the payment schemes that have been set up by the RPA, etc., create a division between farm and tree, which is really unhelpful in terms of that kind of delivery, which potentially has a lot of additional benefits, not only for the landowner itself, but actually downstream and literally downstream for all of the other societal benefits that would come from it. So that's more of a policy thing, and I realise as this group we can't influence that, but that would be, I think, probably a really important thing. With agroforestry and some of the elements of it are going to be a great success. Changes to the way environmental payments are made is really quite important in this respect.
The environmental payments should recognise the value per acreage of agroforestry.
Or should reward.
Can it be covered? I mean, we're in a perverse situation where if you have a wetland or if you have a wooded area, that's not eligible for payment, which is madness. That they should all be part of features of farms, and farmers should be rewarded for those, and not disincentivized.
If you allow your willow to grow out too much, you get all your payments stopped.
Yeah. And there are some, really good examples. Pombrain Wales, where just farmers off their own backs had changed the way that they choose to actually manage the small watercourses and drainage lines on their farm, has made a massive difference. To the way they run their livestock, but actually it's made a massive improvement in terms of water quality, flooding downstream, and so on and so forth.
Yes.
I agree with David. We didn't get Mary started, but trees in the landscape is about more than the traditional planting of blocks of woodland. And the support system is not designed to encourage that. The grants are there, but the eligibility and the way it's structured, it has to go for block planting of 3 hectares or more, really, for the countryside stewardship grants. But the discussions around changing that are going on. I'm involved in them on a monthly basis, so I know that work is afoot to change that. And also the issues around the Rural Payments Agency and eligible area, that will end when the basic payment scheme is decoupled in the next year or two. So those things are probably sorting themselves out, and there's a lot of pressure and lobbying going on around those issues anyway that I don't think is much of a concern. It's more about how we structure the things going forward and influencing those options. But there is a real growing interest in trees in the landscape. We have traditionally had a silver pasture system in the West Country. Our hedge network has always been an important part of the management of livestock. And we're doing increasing amounts of work with farmers looking at the role of hedgerows from a climate adaptation point of view as well as mitigation. We haven't really talked about climate adaptation in the grounds of food and farming.
Well, it's a separate department of the response to the environment, but obviously they're interchanged, so I think maybe we should.
So hedgerow design, for example, a hedgerow which is more mature with trees in it and is more porous to the wind will create a far more wood shelter for grazing livestock than a square box hedge, which is only going to influence 2.5 times its height into the field, and actually will increase the wind speed because of the turbulence against it. Whereas a well-designed hedgerow will provide a lot more protection for livestock, which in a changing climate is important. And there's research to show that land production is improved in a silver pasture system. So there's lots, I think, trees in the landscape, and this then influences the idea of alternative types of farming and farm enterprises. There are opportunities for more diverse businesses around this theme of climate mitigation.
What will make those opportunities, apart from the changes that might already be underway in the grants and support system? Are you adding your voice to those that say that more information about the benefits?
Well, we work with the Organic Research Centre, and one of their researchers, Lindsay Wistance, who does a lot of work on animal behaviour around trees and the welfare issues and the potential knock-on production benefits from higher welfare in grazing livestock. The Soil Association have got their Fab Farmers initiative, which have recently launched, which had an event at Dartington Hall looking at the agroforestry schemes they've got running there. and we're working with them to develop some demonstration, agroforestry or silver pasture demonstration projects. So then, if we run an event on that kind of stuff, we get good attendance from farmers. There 30 to 50 farmers will come to an event on those subjects at the moment. So the interest is there. We need that. The grants help to provide support for that initial capital, but these kind of systems add some value to those trees and those features in the farm in their own right, as well as the potential products you might get from them. And then the public can support it by the biodiversity benefits. So we've got public support providing the carbon and biodiversity incentives. We've got the trees themselves providing a benefit to the grazing livestock, and you can sort of stack up all of those benefits across the business. So it's an interesting time for those sorts of stuff.
Picking up Adam's points in relation to hedgerows and easily involved with a bigger widespread project, ash dieback will lead to a significant change in our hedgerows. And whilst that is problematic and difficult, actually it creates an opportunity, it creates a focus around the hedgerows and allows people to refocus on the importance of those, not only as landscape features, but as biodiversity corridors, as silvo pasture systems. So maybe there is an opportunity around that in terms of reinvesting a kind of our thinking into the value of our hedgerows.
And the diversity that we're planting, because 60% of the trees planted into a lot of woodland creation 15 years ago was ash. Whereas now we're forced to think about the range of species we're using and what trees we're putting in what place.
It's a very common theme, isn't there, about, I think we're all identified as about affecting cultural change at a rate that's going to make a difference, which is quite a challenge, really. And I think almost irrespective of the issue of management of fruit trees or any other facets of the farm infrastructure, it's about influencing people who are in a position to make a change and make it very quickly through information. And one of the benefits of the work we're doing with farmers is that you're starting these conversations and you're identifying people in the community who have responsibility for land management, who talk to their brethren, and they also talk to the other members of the public in their parishes. And you start to you show leadership through those engagements, and you start to build a little bit of gravitas in terms of a movement and a change of opinion. I think the point was made earlier about comparative balance sheet, I'm doing this, aren't I doing well, and you're not, and there's a feeling of competitive development, I'm missing out on something. And almost irrespective, perhaps, of the national stimuli of grants and everything else, you can actually start and affect cultural change if some people are prepared to take the brave step of showing leadership and actually starting that whole process. It's quite interesting. We sit on a small panel of fellow like-minded landowners, but if you're at the aggregate area, we're talking about a lot of land in the counties of Devon and Cornwall. You have a lot of relationships with tenants, and it's through those processes, I think, where you're influencing your peers and others, you can spread this desire really very much more. And I think that's, in terms of the underlying current of response, it's such an important element to this whole theme. And we all share that responsibility, as we understand.
Any other time review after you've spoken?
I was just wondering if this was a time when we could potentially introduce wetlands and their role in the landscape.
Yes.
Great. Yeah. No, really go for it. Right, here we go. So, we've talked about integrating trees and greater canopy cover into farmland and managed land. I think over the last 100 years, one of the biggest changes that we've had in our landscape is how we manage water. And water that falls on land, we've engineered systems so that we are basically passing that water downstream as fast as we possibly can. By engineering, by straightening channels, by putting rivers into their channels themselves rather than allowing them out in the floodplain, we're creating a system which is eroding a great deal of natural capital, but it's eroding carbon as well. So if you think about at the very top of our area in Devon, we've got huge extensive areas of blanket bog and deep peat, many of which live in your ownership. And nationally, 4% of our peatlands are in good ecological health. 1%, I think, have shown no sign of past damage. So we've got this immense wetland carbon store, which is eroding in most situations. You then go into the farmland situation, and most people's focus around wetlands is to pass that water on, as I've said, downstream as fast as possible. If we slow those flows, if we allow water to percolate into soils, if we allow storage of water on farms and our peatlands, the benefits are tremendous from a carbon perspective. Obviously, they aren't productive necessarily from an agricultural perspective. So we have to look about, well, who are the beneficiaries from those systems downstream from flood risk, from carbon, etc., and how can we create markets which actually incentivise landowners to keep more water on their land. When we get down into estuarine and intertidal areas, I mean, this is absolutely critical. Our salt marshes and our intertidal habitats are huge carbon stores. Yet we have increasing sea levels, and those intertidal habitats are being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed against hard flood defences. So there's an immediate gain there in terms of being able to allow our estuarine areas to breathe again, so that they go into their natural floodplains. We need to think about our waterways on farm to be able to spill out into floodplains. We're here talking about that from a carbon perspective, but it's absolutely fundamental for flood risk management side of things. But in saying that, as I said earlier, the people that are going to bear the costs are not always the beneficiaries. The beneficiaries tend to be downstream. So we need to help balance that economy. And there is we can allow water to be stored on land through a whole range of mechanical means, and a lot of those are right. But there's also natural solutions to enable that, and one of those is a big rodent called the beaver. So, and they have certainly huge potential to be able to store those and create that wetland and that huge carbon sink and stop that erosion system. But as I've said, that comes with issues around obviously the farming system, the farm structure, and how we incentivise storing water and slowing flows.
I am aware of the time, and I want to leave the last quarter of an hour for us to think more clearly about the agencies and what this group might see would be potential roles of various agents of change. But I would like to, you to be able to reply to that suggestion that was made. I suggest that since the urban area of our discussion perhaps involves a rather different set of stakeholders, we might leave that for this thing. Albeit, if you have a comment about that, please say to me afterwards. But is that acceptable that we work in that way?
Yeah, I think we shouldn't ignore the urban thing. I think
okay, so
really,
maybe we devote a bit of time to that. We've also not dealt with bioenergy, which is a very thing, although your comments about the irrationality possibly of inducing the growing with more energy than it produces has been noted. So should we, Paul, do you want to say a little
the whole topic
in
of what
response to
is
that?
classified there is a whole other topic in terms of what it means legally, what it means to manage
The whole topic of
beavers.
yes.
So think more about making space.
So
it's part of the animal.
Okay, so I'm going to do that. So the point around all of this is actually ensuring that every part of the system understands the benefit that is being accrued and what it means to them and how that was done. So if you take the example of beavers who will create a wetland system and water is stored up above, and then potentially an area down below has a different frequency or type of water event coming towards them, understanding how that has occurred is important. And that is the same whether it's for having a species do it or having that with natural flood management, i.e. having someone go along and shove a bunch of trees, branches in a river or stream system in order to hold the flow. Yeah. So connecting the public and different folk with the value of these things, I think, is really important. And that has been done. And so there are places where what happens in Somerset with the Somerset Rivers Authority, Somerset how funding's done, but also the Stroud Rural SUDS project, which is Sustainable Urban Drainage Scheme, but Natural Flood Management Scheme, where actually parish councils pay a precept in order to pay for work to be done upstream in order to deliver a benefit. So people realise that directly, and the landowner understands that relationship. The bit that I would flow onto from that, actually with an awful lot of schemes that have occurred, and if you speak to an awful lot of farmers and landowners who have been involved in environmental schemes, they've done it with good heart, they've done it well, and yet they've never really been given feedback in terms of what it's done. Yeah, and yet they get criticised for not having done enough, and they go, but hey, I've gone into the schemes you asked me to go into, and yet I don't know what I've delivered, really, how many more birds and bees there are as a result of it, or what's happened environmentally. So the incentive to want to go into these things, kind of a little bit of it is eroded because you don't understand the full value of what has been done there. And the other part I would just add in around all of this is it's a complex land. You know, we've got finite land, we have environmental limits, and we're asking for an awful lot of things to occur from this piece of land. And when you are changing that system, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong to do, have more or less of one or other thing, it displaces it. Yeah, and so whatever was there will need to potentially go to somewhere else, will be done more efficiently. And the example is in Catskill Mountains, where there was a change. So in order to deliver different water quality type for New York, or wherever it was, Washington, New York, they changed the upstream system in order to change the amount of water and quality of water going down. Fine, that delivered the quality of water at a much better price for those people there. However, what was grown there was displaced, and you get conservation swap, and you get that food requirement goes to somewhere else. So it's understanding that this is a holistic system, and so what you are changing here in Devon, say, is going to potentially have an impact over there. And I'm not saying we can work all this stuff out, perhaps we can, but we have to understand there are consequences for some of these things. So it's a complex picture with lots of people asking for things to be done, and generally there's a farmer there or a landowner who I would suggest is one trying to deal with all the legal bits and pieces, which are environmental, flooding, planning, taxation, employment, plus another person asking them to go, think you should do carbon trees, a few of these and 10 of them, and they're going, oh, I don't know. You know what I mean? We've got to give these people a bit of a fighting chance.
It has a relevance to the point that David pointed out about low food prices, because in order to for better management, to avoid exporting our emissions and importing goods which are produced in a more carbon-intensive way, perhaps, it would need some kind of awareness of the balance between what we produce locally and what is imported. And people have proposed tariffs within the WTO regime, which are compatible with that would make an adjustment for.
And that is a crucial thing. So, what are the non-tariff barriers in terms of how we work with other, with other nation states, which we don't know at this point in terms of what's going to happen. But within this country, we have some of the highest standards. So, and something we should be really proud of. But that is interesting when you go into different trade relations.
So, thank you for elaborating on that. I suggest that we do carry on and look at who ought to be doing what, but it's fine to comment on the role which perhaps urban councils or town councils might be able to take action, as well as within the framework that we're talking about. I mean, from the discussion that we've had now, just looking back at it, what sort of actions emerge from which could be taken action on within Devon? I think I'm feeling clearer about the recommendations which Devon might make in terms of national policies than I am on the things that can be acted on within our boundaries and locally and by agencies and institutions.
Is it possible to, the national payments for subsidies, is it possible to regionalise and have an element which the county can distribute?
Get the county some control over the payments.
I would argue.
David, you have a point to make.
Well, I'm going to have to rush actually, but what I wanted to say is I think that whatever we do locally has to be informed. And the more you go more and more local, the more you are open to some slightly quirky results, because a lot of people care a lot about the subject, about climate change, and they care so much about it that they haven't necessarily got all the nuances. And we just discussions today have shown how incredibly nuanced this whole area is. We could end up, if we're not careful, with a whole lot of initiatives that actually cut each other up and contradict each other, done locally with people who are less informed. And so at county level, I think it's possible to get some initiatives that work. I think, as somebody who's chaired our parish meeting for rather too long, I know the sort of conversations we have, and they're not always the most informed. So I just wanted to put a caution, really, that whoever ends up in a position where they're going to influence behaviour has an understanding of the consequences of those decisions.
Adam and Mary?
Well, just picking that up, I mean, the county council, we have a very enlightened council here that has an estate of county council farms. And I think that there may be, in many ways they do operate as a single thing. They do the farm-wise and the education piece together, and it may well be that some support and assistance for them to take up, I don't know, grazing management. It's a skill that you learn, and it's very powerful and allows people to suppress carbon and use more grazed grass. And other support for. It's expensive to get the kind of drills that work for no-till, and of course we've got with the Duchy Farm Estate and also the National Frost Estate. Those are sort of big enough land holdings where you could actually make a local difference. And I did just on the you were talking about the urban piece. I mean, from a planning point of view, getting urban farms on rooftops. It's quite a large land area, and that could start taking some of that moisture, water that flows so fast off concrete. So I don't know if you wanted some local action.
Thank you.
I will send you a document which will save talking about it, but we've got some good models to demonstrate how approaches for working at parish level in terms of targeting and engagement to deal with water issues and other topics, which work quite well. But I think in response to the kind of locally derived schemes, I think the local role is around the targeting and prioritisation and looking at where we want things to happen. But from my dealing with the RPA, everyone criticises their admin, but people underestimate the admin job that they're dealing with. And I think you start to devolve that down too far, and you end up with 50 replicates of an admin process. You're just creating more opportunity for risk, and a lack of consistency between different areas, which you do need to have a certain amount of. So I think local prioritisation and feeding back and lobbying on behalf of the local community at the national level is really important. But I would be reluctant around the idea of having agro-environment schemes locally.
I think that's, sorry, just a bit quick on that. I think that's the case if you take the same administrative model and try and apply it at a local level. But we've seen the continual increase in the administrative burden around agri-environment, for example, from where a stewardship advisor in the past used to process 25 to 30 agreements a year, now do 2 or 3. We don't need to keep ironing in those mistakes which have been made.
Yes, trying to link the urban and the rural. So the good work here, Exeter University, their sweep work currently shows that for the Dartmoor National Park, that the housing development that's already planned and proposed will generate in the order of about 870,000, 900,000 additional day visits to the national park within the next 20 to 30 years. Now, that's just from the housing, that's let alone the tourism development. So you could equally see a similar number in terms of development. So we're bringing we're bringing society closer, but those pressures that come with that growth is enormous on the rural landscape. And whether that be around biodiversity, whether that be around erosion, whether that be around just recreational pressure, all of those things are coming. And there isn't this kind of link, I don't think, within local authorities at county council level in terms of understanding the impact of those developments. Now, I'm not suggesting those developments shouldn't happen. They're absolutely essential. But we need to understand in the context of what that means for land managers and the landscape in which we live in. And those pressures are going to only enhance the impact that's going to come down the line with a changing climate. So we need to bring, I think, the rural to the urban. We need to allow people to have space in which they can undertake recreation, understand the narratives of the landscape they live in. And I think there needs to be an entirely different model in terms of the way we perceive and design those things into our communities.
I just add, I'm really keen on that's something to explore with further, because it's such a huge subject. But we tend to look at offsetting or mitigation for new urban developments in a very piecemeal way, and in a very site-focused manner often. And furthering what David's saying, we've got 15, 20,000 new inhabitants that might be around Exeter. Why wouldn't all of those new properties be looking at a new county forest that's on the fringes of Exeter? Those are the sorts of ambitions that we should be looking at.
I can think of an answer.
Well, which is where we come back. But some of it is sustainably managed.
Thank you. I think that an urban-rural divide on this subject would be a disaster is absolutely critical. It's a societal response we have to have a combined, I think, sharing responsibility. I think there's a real risk that if it's deemed to be a rural solution or an imposition on the rural environment, that would be really bad news. The rural environment has the potential to actually deliver society. It has to be rewarded for that in a positive way. I think we also mustn't underestimate the real desire for so many farmers and land managers to actually contribute to this in a positive fashion. Paul's point is absolutely right. I think misinformation at the moment and their absolute frustration, if not anger, in terms of the blame that's coming their way in terms of being contributors, but in fact they are probably in the greatest position to be the saviours to this problem. And I think in terms of quick responses, a much better understanding of the reality and the facts is just a critical component. And one reason of despair at the agricultural press is the frustration that's been expressed and the industry's inability seemingly to get that position out there in a way that actually allows us to move forward positively. So I think it's a really important thing to report right.
Agricultural press.
Absolutely, yeah.
As opposed to what's on the news and things like that.
Well, I think making farmers feeling they're doing the right thing and enabling them to do the right thing is a really important part of the solution and the response, isn't it? So get into that position as quickly as possible.
And creating the awareness amongst the general public that is what's happening. Yeah. Because otherwise the narrative is all, the Eat Lancet report, funded by Cargill and the American sugar industry. Isn't that surprising that it came up with let's not eat meat?
Thank you. Right. Sarah and Martin.
It was to do with the piecemeal approach to development offsetting. So probably most people are aware that there is going to be a statutory net gain process through the development planning process. And we're trying to work, so this is something for local authorities to work on, but absolutely with NGOs and land managers is to come up with a strategic approach to this for Devon that works in a much better way so we don't end up with lots of little bits of habitat that no one manages properly and don't provide any functions. So that is an action that we need to do. And it is then to link in the net gain through development with all this other stuff we've been talking about as well, so tree planting and carbon codes and everything else. And so one thing also that would be good to do is some sort of investment platform. So I know there are lots of businesses and organisations looking to plant trees. You've got the carbon code registry, there's nothing on it. So could we have some sort of better way to try and link people up, so funding with the people who do want to do stuff. So you've got N-Trade, which works for Poole Harbour, which acts as a platform. Can we do something like that in Devon? And again, so I had a chat to the Forestry Commission about this yesterday, who could be best placed to do this, and it might be that DCC is best placed as that strategic county-wide organisation to set something up to try and bring people together so we can bring funding together with landowners. And also, some of this will need to be done in partnership or bringing different landowners together so that we can have economies of scale. So again, it's just to try and help facilitate that process in some way.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just to add, David Hill at Environment Bank is a particular advocate of such a thing. Very interesting conversations to be had there.
Yeah.
The Environment Bank.
Absolutely.
And they do offsetting.
And it's a dangerous, unregulated world. So you do have to be very careful about how and who engages over it in terms of where the money is going and who's profiting out of those types of approaches I would suggest.
Who would evaluate it is an issue, isn't it? So carbon code is presumably one of the suggestions that would allow that to be evaluated. Would you question that?
No, but there are other examples of green banks and offsetting thing, where I think we just...
Oh, yes.
So there is a
It's
crucial...
quite controversial and potentially lots of problems. That's where if net gain becomes statutory for local authorities, we absolutely need to put something in place to ensure that we do get proper benefits
To
from
be fair,
it.
there's a massive opportunity within it as well. And it can be positive. You just have to make sure you understand your baseline.
Yeah. What opportunities?
So the opportunities in encouraging the procurement and supply of the thing that is being offset or bid for. And so you've got to know where you're starting from and who is buying it and how that marries up. Because if you don't have a proper accounting system and a baseline, then you kind of buy this one, buy some of this and that one, and actually it's made no real difference.
I'm in an untutored situation, so I'm hearing two different things. One is about development, and net gain being the substitution of protection for some area of land in compensation for something that's lost. Is that what you meant by net gain?
So every development will have to have a 10% net gain. Yeah. So there is a mitigation hierarchy. So I know it's very controversial, but you have to avoid impacts initially. And if you can't do that, and it's not irreplaceable habitat, you go through it.
Understand. Yeah. But there's another conversation talking about purchased offsets, which is a different mechanism, and that's what I understand your points to be about.
Yeah, and within all of this, there is the complication of lots of different things that might be purchased. So whether it's the biodiversity side of things, or we've been talking about carbon, and the relationship between these bits is really crucial.
Yeah.
And to my mind, for the landowner and farmer, is unpicking and understanding what these things are, because it's really confusing.
And that's why we need a strategic approach to this. And really good plain English communication about how it all works and who to get involved, how you can get involved.
So
because it is very confusing.
I'm seeing lots of nods about the importance of having an agreement about what that should be and what it should involve.
We're delivering the district level licensing contract for Natural England, looking at the net gains for Great Crested Newts.
Which is really controversial.
Yeah, so we're one of those people where we're learning in terms of how it works
and that's
how
another thing again, isn't it? Is protected species and so it's very there are all sorts of things going on, and we need to try and ensure that we understand strategically how it all fits together.
I think this is where David's point earlier comes in terms of actually having this strategic roadmap in terms of where the opportunities are, where we could go, joining that with nature recovery networks, so that we do solve climate and biodiversity crisis. That not to be prescriptive, but to show us where all of those multiple benefits could be derived.
Yeah.
That's critical.
And also trying to keep your points about not getting too complicated. Things, so.
Yeah, very, very much so. And at the moment, because there seems to be a bit of a void in terms of the leadership around that. There's lots of different sectors sort of moving around in quite competitive situations, leaving those that are going to be the providers and like landowners on the ground, seeing who do we tend to.
Well, it's all very new though, isn't
it?
So I think last word for Paul, and then I think
it was
wind up. Final bit within all of this is we shouldn't shy away from finding positive solutions. You know what I mean? So there are lots of different ways to achieve things. And there are lots of novel ways of doing things. different areas of the same land mass and actually come at it with different ways of seeing it. And actually a whole load of it is about going, what is a particular way of doing things, and actually how can we do this to best advantage for all of us? So that's a way forward of it, is being positive solutions.
Can I point very well taken?
Can I also we haven't talked very much about communities, but there are lots of communities across Devon declaring climate emergencies and ecological emergencies at the moment. And so again, it's this thing about communication and simple messages, and as David said, it's all very confusing. So we do need, as part of this, to have some clear guidance for communities in terms of tree planting where it's appropriate, where it isn't. And I don't know if possible, some simplified carbon counting mechanism as well, so that they do know whether they're achieving things, or they can manage their churchyard for wildlife and count that towards.
But you said
So we
clear
don't have that.
messages. The problem, one of the issues at the moment is that the messages are excessively simplistic. So it's clear messaging, but a really skillful job in communicating.
Yeah, or some more. I mean,
communicating the complexity of it,
Yeah.
but without, but also the urgency, as you said.
Or further
So it's
advice.
and also the positivity. Otherwise, I think we create an environment where everybody goes all doomed. Where actually, there are some things to do, but it's how to do those without simplifying to the point of absurdity.
And there are some amazing people out there who are doing things. So you've got Audrey Compton in Teambridge, to name her, who's doing some great stuff on climate and ecology. And we need to get these ambassadors out there to share learning across the county. So we're trying to do that through the LNP, but really important that we have more resource to do that. And we get lots of communities contacting me for advice. I don't have any capacity at all, so I'm sure Pete Woodland's Trust do as well. We do need more capacity to be able to advise communities and go out there and talk to them about stuff.
Provide that support.
So we just don't have that at all at the moment.
That's a very constructive point to meet, and I'd like to invite you all to my parish council. Thank you very much. Did you have a very, very brief last word, Martin?
Well, I just want to expand on the benefits of local food, actually, especially local vegetables. Because actually, if you can sell them direct, you've got the freshness and the health benefits involved. If you sell direct, we can harvest the day before, on the day, and deliver straight away. So there's no packaging, there's no refrigeration, there's very low food miles, and also we have a relationship with our customers, and so they're being informed about seasonality and cooking, and they come out to the farms, and we have 8 community days a year, and it's just a great relationship between our customers and us. And actually, Guy Watson on his transformed a lot of people's lives with his once a week message he writes on his newsletter. But it's so informative to
I'm
people.
hearing
Yeah, really
a lot
interesting.
of clicketing away, so I think that is all going down in the record. So
And
thank you
I just
very
want to say
much.
we do need this infrastructure. I'm not sure what the role of LEPs is and how we get funding, but we desperately need local food infrastructure to be able. But it is crazy. Only 2% of our food is bought directly. Of our retail food is bought locally. 98% of it goes to the local retailers. 50% of all vegetables is coming out from southern Spain, and vegetables are very bulky. To be honest, they've got 80% moisture in them. So why have we got this crazy system? We can be growing our, even if it was 10% of our food was local, it would be a vast improvement on what we have.
So I don't think we have anyone who sits on the LEP here, but I think that will not be the case in some of the other hearings. So just finally, I should let you go because I really appreciate the fact that all of you have stayed for the entire time, and we very much appreciate your giving up your time and bringing your expertise to it. I'm sure there are many things that we haven't covered sufficiently, or that we haven't been able to arrive at conclusions. But if 2 or 3 of you find that you do have more refined proposals to make, there is still a chance to submit those through the website, the Devon Climate Emergency .org website, or in other ways via us personally.
Well, I had a few lines that I wanted to bring up because I hear things are coming up all the time, and I think these are the things that we need to really pay attention to. One of them is the optimization of land use. So that's the land use framework, so how best use the land. Obviously, consumption of local produce, that will save a lot of mileage, a lot of carbon. And one that came through a lot is the education and knowledge transfer, so that people are informed at all levels. Is a national, is a regional problem, but it can be helped by the small steps, by the small people, the small groups, the communities, individuals, as long as they understand what they are doing. So when this issue about the hydrology, so how a farmer can improve hydrology by maybe doing little things in the river, and that's only by understanding and by that knowledge that is being transferred. But also picking up on the tools. I think this is really important. I want to pick that on that again. Is and it was brought up earlier, the fact that the only way to measure this is by having these methodologies, these tools that can assess what the soil carbon content is, for example, and there are so many of them that we need to know what the baseline is, we need to know what the change or the effect of change is, but what tools are there and what tools we should be using to make this measurement. Because different people might be using different tools, and at the time of pulling it all together, then it's not going to be comparable. So I think that this also should be picked up. At the end of the day, we have to quantify these, and we need to have methods for quantification. Anyway, that's kind of the things that overall I picked up. I think, the issue of trees. No, any tree anywhere, we need to plant the right trees in the right place.
Right, wetland in the right place.
Anything.
Right, where is the grass?
It's worth remembering we do have an advantage in the southwest because our trees grow very quickly compared to the rest of the country.
Right.
So
Okay.
there are benefits, but I think one thing we've got to remember is that the climate is changing, and so summers are getting hotter and drier,
Yes.
and winters are getting wetter, and we're getting more extreme events, and all those things will affect all our crops, all our land management in various ways. So we have to do something.
Thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you very much. Very nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution.